Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I have said this all along, that this was one of the most important panels we do all weekend. I don't know where to start. So can I just say this? Be nice, buy some raffle tickets for the Dylan thing. There's like 20 left. Don't make me put $200 in, but I will if I have to, but I don't want to win it. So it's just, Elizabeth Ann is right there, and she'll sell you tickets. So I want to introduce Michelle Rado. She has an incredible podcast called Dare to Tell. And she approached me the year before last, or last year, and said that she wanted to sponsor the Bookfest. And we didn't really know what that would look like. And she came down last year and just loved it. And this year said, I want to sponsor a panel. And this is, of course, the panel she should be sponsoring, because these people have dared to tell their stories. So I'm going to let Michelle have the mic, even though she doesn't want it. And so she'll tell you a little bit about Dare to Tell. You should listen to it. It's both Sari and I recorded with her in the last month. And I have to say, like, when I got off the phone, I was like, oh my God, I can't listen to myself anymore. But she edited it into a way that was really kind of thrilling. So here's Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Martha. I am so excited to be here today, and I am thrilled to sponsor this panel. I will say Daring to Tell is the name of my podcast because that's what I find challenges me the most. And I love talking with writers about figuring out how they have dared to tell their brave stories, and that's kind of what we do. I have to take a breath because I'm a little nervous being in front of people. I love talking, and seeing you all looking back at me is like, oh boy, this is a whole new way of talking into a microphone. I will say, on permission, I was so excited for this topic because we have heard so much through this festival yesterday, Friday, about what it takes to tell our stories, but I feel like the first step is the permission, and what does that mean? So that's also why I was so excited to sponsor this specific panel. I had a wonderful conversation with Sari on her memoir, which is, and you may find yourself, I'm like, there it is. So I hope that you guys may be interested. I'm in the back. Not only do I have pencils and bookmarks, I have chocolate, because I found that that's always a great way to make friends. So thank you all. I really look forward to this. Back to Martha.
I say this at every panel, but I'll say it again. Buy books, buy books, buy books. It is really how we can support a small town like Woodstock and keep it going. The Golden Notebook is essential to our town and our lives. So, in any case, I'm only going to introduce Sari. It's been a real pleasure having Sari in my life as a friend. Every once in a while something crazy happens and I say, oh, I have to call Sari. And really, she's like, I knew you'd call because things are so crazy. And you know, there's a lot of writer gossip. Maybe you don't know that, but sometimes it just bubbles up and I need to talk to somebody about it. So Sari's my go-to. Sari's a writer and editor who lives in Kingston, New York. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, and elsewhere. She's a contributing editor. She may not be, she's
kind of an old bio, but.
Yeah, it's an old bio. But here's the most important thing. About 5 years ago, Sari called me and said, I'm thinking about starting an online magazine called Oldster. Oh. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And Oldster is one of the greatest publications out there. Every week there is something amazing. Yes. And so subscribe to her Substack because that's how she gets to do it. And she interviews people of all ages. Sari has a really old soul in the best way. And she's very comfortable with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, Sari Botton.
Thank you, Martha. It's an honor to be back at the Woodstock Book Fest. This is, I think, my third year leading a panel, and I'm always so grateful that this exists and that Martha allows me to take part in it. I also publish on Substack another magazine called Memoirland. And this panel comes out of that work. Memoirland on Substack publishes 5 days a week. And one of the things I publish there is called the Memoirland Author Questionnaire. And all of these authors have taken the Memoirland Author Questionnaire. So check it out. There's all kinds of different, there's personal essays, there's craft essays, there's stuff about being in the business of writing. And so now about this panel. Martha and I put our heads together months ago. She wanted me to do a panel, and we weren't sure what the topic was going to be. We knew that it was going to be related to memoir. And I said, you know, Elissa Altman has this book coming out, Permission, that is so central to everything I have been thinking about and writing about for decades. It's such an important book. What if we made it the center of a panel on the difficulty in feeling permitted and to write and finding the courage to write things about ourselves and also about the people in our lives, which is the most thorny question memoirists and personal essayists wrestle with. It's something that I've been wrestling with my entire career. I had a series on the Rumpus. It still exists, by the way. Roxane Gay and Debbie Millman just bought the Rumpus, yay. I have a column on there called Conversations with Writers Braver Than Me. For many years, I was struggling to write this book. I didn't feel permitted. I had upset people in my life. And so then Elissa comes out with this book, really going right to the heart of the matter. And I knew that it was going to be something that both Jonathan and Hyeseung would also want to speak about. And so I thought, this is the panel I want to have. And you guys all came out for it. So thank you for coming out. I know that it's a central question for all of us. So let me introduce this wonderful panel. I'm going to start with Elissa Altman, the author of Permission, which is at the center of this. Elissa Altman is the award-winning author of Permission, The New Memoirist, and The Courage to Create, and the memoirs Motherland, a memoir of love, loathing, and longing, Trafe, My Life as an Unorthodox Outlaw, and Poor Man's Feast, a love story of comfort, desire, and the art of simple cooking. 3-time finalist and winner of a James Beard Award for Narrative Food Writing, she has been a Pushcart Prize nominee for her essay, Forever Less of Beauty, and a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award, Connecticut Book Award, Maine Literary Award, and the Frank McCourt Memoir Prize. Her work has appeared in publications including Orion, Longreads, The Bitter Southerner, On Being, Oh, the Oprah Magazine, LitHub, The Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and The Washington Post, where her column, Feeding My Mother, ran for a year. Altman writes and speaks widely on the intersection of permission and creativity and has appeared live on the TEDx stage at the Public Theater in New York. She teaches the craft of memoir at Orion, Fine Artwork Center, Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, Kripalu, Truro Center for the Arts, Rutgers Community Writing Workshop, and beyond. She lives in Connecticut with her wife, book designer Susan Turner. Elissa Altman. Next to Elissa is Jonathan Lerner, who is the author of the memoir Swords in the Hands of Children, Reflections of an American Revolutionary, about his participation in the 1960s radical left and the militant Weather Underground, and the new memoir, Performance Anxiety, the Headlong Adolescence of a Mid-Century Kid, about his youth in the years just before the disruptions we called the 60s. He has had a long career as a magazine writer and editor, focusing mainly on architecture, environment, and public space, and is a longtime contributing editor at Landscape Architecture magazine. Jonathan Lerner. And at the other end of the table, we have Hyeseung Song, who is a first-generation Korean-American painter and the author of Docile, Memoirs of a Not-So-Perfect Asian Girl. Docile has been called a savagely beautiful memoir by David Henry Wang, a revelation by Chloe Cooper-Jones, and was named a best book by Apple, Electric Literature, and more. Raised in Texas, Song studied philosophy at Princeton and Harvard universities and painting at the Grand Central Atelier in New York City. A two-time Green Shields Award winner, TEDx speaker, and resident artist of the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation in New Mexico and the Vermont Studio Center and the Alfred Trafford Klotz International Program. Song has also taught at the Maryland Institute College of Art and the Fashion Institute of Technology. She is at work on a second memoir, a meditation on grief, mental illness, and the power of art making. Song lives in Brooklyn and upstate New York. Welcome. Okay. So in the interest of keeping this tight and making sure that you all have time for some questions after, I'm not going to have people read, but I am going to have them tell us a little bit about what their memoirs are about, so that you have some context for where they're coming from in our discussion. Why don't we start at that end with Hyeseung?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be here and in this conversation. My debut memoir is about 8 months old. It's called Docile, and it's the journey of many, many years, the writing of many, many years, and it's about growing up as a first-generation Korean American in Texas with a beautiful but domineering mother and a father who chases after something he calls big money. In order to find visibility in my culture, in my family, and in the white society that I grew up in Texas, I go after the lowest hanging fruit possible, big academic achievement. The story is about going to Princeton and to Harvard, and ultimately ignoring the call of art long enough to develop mental illness and lose everything of any external worth and find redemption in art. I think of it as the Asian Girl Interrupted, and it's a story about an artist coming to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Jonathan.
My book is called Performance Anxiety, which anybody who survived adolescence can probably relate to. It's framed in my senior year in high school, which was 1964-65. It's not linear, although it has that framing. There's a lot of backstory about my family and myself. I wrote it as all memoirs to uncover some material of my own, but I also wrote it to describe what it was like to grow up in a relatively privileged environment at that moment of peak American power before the Vietnam War had really absorbed everybody's consciousness, before the youth quake, before the civil rights movement had segued into the Black Power movement, before Stonewall, before the second wave feminism. So it's at this kind of moment of incipient explosion, but just before it. The personal part of it largely is my grappling with my own sexuality. Before Stonewall, there wasn't a model for how to come out, or even the concept of coming out, really. It's also a lot about my coming to awareness of race and racism, and my first foray into activism in the civil rights movement when I was in junior high and high school. And it's also about my family and the fact that my mother died during that year and my father was quite checked out, leaving me and my siblings to manage that trauma on our own.
Thank you. Okay, Elissa, so tell us about Permission, which is a combo platter. It's a memoir and a craft book.
Thank you. And this is my memoir wife. Sorry, honey. We're doing a lot of events together, so thank you, and thank you both for and thank you all for being here, and especially to Martha, who brings us all together.
And Michelle Rito, who is sponsoring this panel.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, Permission came out of a situation that I found myself in. In 2013, I published my first memoir, Poor Man's Feast. Linear, what I thought was innocuous love story. There was food and sustenance at the center about, how leaving New York City and moving to Connecticut full time to be with the woman who would become my wife. And about 3/4 of the way through the book, I told a story in 8 lines about my paternal grandmother walking out on my father and aunt and grandfather in 1926. So that was almost at the time that I wrote it, almost a century ago. And 6 months later, I found myself excised from the family completely. These were people who were like my siblings, Thanksgiving and, holidays together, vacations together, not anymore. And it took me 10 years to get to a place, decade to get to a place where I could think about it in a way that was not filled with, oh my God, I'm this horrible person and I told the secret and self-loathing and blah, blah, blah. But to think about it in terms of, story ownership. What are the stories we're allowed to tell? And what are we not allowed to tell? And sometimes we don't even know. So this was not a secret in my home, but apparently it had been a secret in the home of my extended family with whom I didn't grow up. So, and I realized over time that this was the elephant in the room. After teaching many, many memoir classes, I had a lot of students come up to me and say, I really want to write this book, but I can't because my family's going to vaporize. They're all dead, but they're going to vaporize. It's like, and that actually did happen. So with a famous novelist who was in my class, but that's where Permission came from. So thank you.
Thank you. So memoirists, especially those new to the genre, almost universally struggle to feel permitted to write about something. It's what keeps many from going forward with their books. It kept me from going forward for a decade and a half. What was the part, and this is out to everybody, what was the part of your memoir that was the most difficult to feel permitted to write about? For how long did you wrestle with it? Why don't we start this time with Jonathan?
I didn't really feel that I wasn't permitted to write this story, but I felt a need to excavate and reveal my relationship with my father. My father is not living, and I couldn't have written this book while he was living. And I couldn't have written my previous memoir either while he was living. And I don't know if I've actually found the answer to that, but I understand a lot more about him, and I understand more about how his.
Could you bring?
Oh, sorry.
Speak in the mic. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
How's that? How's that better? Okay. I know my father much better now than I did when he was alive, and than I did before I wrote the book. Because he was gone, there wasn't a sort of permission issue. And I don't think anyone else in my family has been shocked or upset by anything they read in the book, so that's my answer.
Were you worried, though, that they might be?
No, actually, I was eager to see how my siblings would remember pivotal moments differently, which they have.
Yeah.
But it's been kind of a friendly, jocular, well, that's not how I saw it, but there's not been any fighting about it.
So often when I interview memoirists, they tell me that the book they produced, they couldn't have while their parents were still alive. And for a long time, I thought that was the case with me, and I definitely have another book that's going to eventually find its way out into the world at a different time. But yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, thank you. Hyeseung?
I started writing this book when I was 20, and I'm 46 now. And I know. And I think the answer to that question has changed over time because it's been a long journey. I hate that word sometimes because it's always something euphemistic to describe something that's really, really hard, but the writing was hard. When I was at Princeton, my sophomore year in college, I was excruciatingly depressed, and I was encouraged by the dean of my college to leave Princeton and was sent back home to Houston. And my first generation Korean American parents were astonished, and it was not within the realm of possibility that their firstborn was not going to finish college. So as a bootstrapping measure, they sent me to Korea, where I was supposed to reckon with my racial identity and my mental illness. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen, but on the way back to school, back to Princeton, I had this new understanding about myself that I was maybe not Korean in the way that I thought, not American in the way that I thought, but I was this third distinct separate thing, Korean American. And when I came back to Princeton, I went to the page. I went to the page and I wrote and wrote and wrote. And what did I write? I wrote about my family, and this particular story, it was about my dad. And this person, this character dad, was not like the other dads that I grew up with in the affluent white neighborhood in Houston. He was the dad of Educated. He was the dad of The Glass Castle. He was the dad of the film Minari. And he was big and idealistic and a risk taker. And I kept writing these stories about our family and about him because he established the infrastructure of our collective lives. He was the one that decided that we were going to immigrate. He was the one who decided we were going to live in Texas. He was doing all of these things. And so the story, I think the hardest thing that I ever had to write about in terms of permission and consent in memoir was the story of a triangle in a square. And the square is the room of the family, and the triangle is 3 points that are connected by the point of the mother, the point of the father, and the point of the daughter. And when I was young, there was no villain, but maybe there was an innocent, and I was the innocent one. But over time, the swooshing and the difference of vectors between the points, they changed, and the triangle changed. And so the story is a lot about that. And in terms of like how I reckoned with this, right before the book came out, I read a lot of memoirists who are, I'm sure Sari and Elissa, and Jonathan, we've all read these same, like Mary Carr, Anne Lamott, Vivian Gordon, all the people who write about the ethics of writing about other people. And I wanted to read, what I wanted was absolution. Like I wanted to go into the confessional booth and come out with an easy penance, and I wanted it to be, the answer to be, no one is going to die from my memoir. No one is going to be maimed by my words. And I thought right before my book came out, what is gonna happen when I have the wisdom of a 60-year-old or a 70-year-old? What am I gonna look back at this book and think, oh my gosh, cringe. But something happened right after my book came out that collapsed that and compressed that wisdom, the wisdom of the 60, 70, 80-year-old. I thought I had written with a lot of empathy about that triangle in a square room. I thought I had written with a lot of thinking about the calculus of the different people who were involved and what I was going to say. And I thought about the dad who is the real dad of my life and the dad who is the character on the page. And 2 weeks after my book came out, that I thought, I was very afraid that I was going to kill someone with this book. My dad dies unexpectedly, and it was just such a startling thing to see that lens. You have this lens, and you think you've got it into focus, but I had not ever thought that that my dad was going to die, like the dad of my real life was going to die, because I think I buoyed myself into writing this memoir, this really vulnerable memoir, because I had the runway of unconditional love from him. He was a man who came from Korea. He was 77. He didn't want to read my book because he said, I'm the villain, I'm the villain. And we all said, you are not the villain. You just have to read it. You are such the redemptive arc in the book. And he never read it. And that was really, really tough. So the answer to your question, Sarah, I still wrestle with it now.
Yeah. I know how you, it must be especially fraught given what happened to your dad.
Into the mic, Sarah.
Oh, yeah, it's especially fraught given what happened to your dad. But also knowing he never read it, we know that's not what killed him. Right?
Thank you for saying that. That helps a lot.
You're off the hook. Thank you.
Thanks.
Elissa.
So I just want to say this one thing. I have a memoirist friend who I'm sure all of you would know, and she once said to me, "No one has ever said, 'Yay, there's a memoirist in the family.'" So no one likes to be written about.
Elissa, I just gave a talk at the Southern Vermont Writers Conference called
Yay.
"A Writer is Born and a Family Trembles."
Okay, there you go. So, so again, I wrote this book in 2013. It was a book about love and sustenance. That's what it was about. And I was very close to my family. I have no siblings. And they were my family of origin. When sometimes you're closer to a mother's side of the family, sometimes to the other side. This was my dad's side of the family. My dad was really just a pivotal figure in my life who saved me, saved my brain and my emotional self over and over and over again. We could not have been closer. And then he passed in a car accident in 2002. And I looked to that family, to that side of the family, for comfort and sustenance and love. And so I think that when I wrote this book, he had been gone for 11 years at that point. When I wrote this book, I was trying to unpack how I was a food writer at the, early on, and I was trying to unpack how that happened, because I grew up in a home where my mother was, and still is, a horrific cook. My father was an amazing cook. And I, you hear about peeling the onion and peeling back the layers. I was trying to get to why was sustenance so central to my life and to my father's life. And I came to that story about my grandmother, who had been, and this is something I want to talk to you, she had been a classically trained pianist who played in City Center when she was 14 years old, and that I have reason to believe was taken away from her, and it turned her life upside down. She was an immigrant. She was very young. She came here very young, and the family sort of patinaed our history with perfection. We're the perfect mothers, and we're the perfect siblings, and we're the perfect cousins, and everything we do is perfect, and when we're doctors and we're lawyers and blah, 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 on and on. And, memoirists, I don't know if we're born this way or not, but we are the truth tellers. We cannot get out of our own way. We are the truth tellers. And I had to write this book, and it never occurred to me that those 8 lines would basically end my world as I knew it. I was, 40 at that point, turned my life upside down, pitched me headlong into very, very serious depression. Pulled the rug out from under me, threatened my mouth. It was as difficult as it could be. And, and I still have no relationship with these people who I do not know if they have read this book, but I keep thinking that they're going to show up at any number of my events, which may happen. But I had to understand why. Why are our families and the people around us so completely clinging with bleeding fingertips to this myth that they have created around themselves? Because none of us is perfect. There's a great Vivian Gornick quote that I'm sure you know: for the drama to deepen, we need to see the loneliness of the monster and the cunning of the innocent. So, we are all human, with the exception of some people in politics, but we are all human. And I needed to understand why, and that's really where permission came from.
Mm. So I want to hear from you guys also about what helped you overcome the fear so that you could go forward with that aspect of your memoir, or your book in general. What other writers or editors helped you? How did you make peace with doing the work? I mean, I'm also thinking, Jonathan, I know you said you weren't afraid, but how did you get to the place where you felt like you could unearth all this stuff about your dad? I mean, let's start with you again.
Let's see, where shall I start with this? Well, I want to tell you the origin story of this book, actually, which doesn't really have to do with my father, but does have to do with something that's scary. The origin story of the book is actually the Me Too movement in 2017, the Harvey Weinstein moment. Like many boys, gay and not gay, grappling with how to be a sexual person and how to be a man as an adolescent. I had a number of kind of shallow relationships and shallow sexual connections with girls when I was a kid. I wasn't really interested in them. I was interested in showing myself and maybe showing the world that actually I was a straight guy, which I wasn't. And that had been in my mind probably since the 60s, when I was sort of adjacent to and affected by the emergence of second-wave feminism. I mean, it had been something bothering me, feeling that I'd been not a good guy to some of these girls. Harvey Weinstein and I are the same age, or were the same age, he's dead, right?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I'll have to fact check that.
And we're both Jewish boys that grew up in the 60s, and his behavior and my behavior have almost nothing in common. But I just kind of thought, well, maybe there's a moment here now, maybe I can say something about this. And my first instinct was to write an op-ed about it, which I was quickly talked out of by my oldest friend, who's a lawyer and a very careful person, who said, you need to really think this through, don't do something precipitous, this is a pretty complicated issue here. So I didn't do that, and I didn't do anything with it for a while, and then a few years later came the Brett Kavanaugh, Christine Blasey Ford moment, and which kind of brought it back. I never date raped anybody or got anybody drunk or got blind drunk myself as a kid, the way he did, by all reports. But he grew up about a mile from where I grew up 20 years later. I knew guys like him. I knew girls like her. She was a lifeguard at the country club that was a quarter of a mile from our house, which we couldn't join, by the way. It was restricted against Jews. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll do this as a novel, and I'll write, there'll be a character like Brett and a character like Christine. I might even use their real names, since it's a novel, you can do what you want. And a character like me who's kind of observing this. And I started researching his history, and there's a book that the two Times writers who broke that story wrote called The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, which is kind of fascinating. And it's all about the neighborhood I grew up in. And then I thought, God, I don't want to spend the next 3 years thinking about this guy. So I didn't do that. I wrote a novel, and some other things happened, some years went by, there was the pandemic, I didn't have anything to do, I wasn't working, and I had really enjoyed writing my first memoir about the Weather Underground, oddly enough. And I thought maybe memoir is something I really know how to do, so I came back to this kernel of adolescence, of my adolescence, which was this poor treatment of girls as a way to cover up the fact that I was gay, and a way into telling the story of my own trajectory with that. So, but I couldn't give up. I somehow couldn't get past the Brett and Chrissy thing. And the first two drafts of this book still had a whole section, sort of led off actually with what I've just described. And actually don't really have anything to do with the story. I mean, you're writing a memoir is a story. It has to have the kind of internal consistency and plot and characters and story arc and conflict and resolution that any good story has. And that was really tangential, even though it had been sort of the provocation. And it took me several years and several drafts and several kind of kick-ass friends, including that lawyer and another friend who's a writer and my husband who's a great reader, to convince me that this is not part of the story. I'll just get rid of it. In the answer to the question about who helped fix it, or helped get me to the point where I could fix the story and make the story real, that's that answer.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And sometimes, when you work on a memoir, sometimes you write so much stuff that you think belongs in the story, but it doesn't actually. I mean, that's another conversation. But yeah, I sort of reframed my whole memoir in a revision. I realized there was a different container, and it didn't need a lot of.
This is something I've learned in journalistic writing, where you have to be very economical, and I've had some really good editors who taught me to understand what is not germane, what's also interesting maybe, but in some way related, but it's not in this story. It might be in some other story.
Yeah, finding the right lens for your memoir is really important, and often it doesn't happen until you're 2 or 3 drafts in, but that's a whole other panel, maybe next year. Hyeseung.
Yeah, I touched on this earlier. I think that the general advice about writing with empathy is excellent, but I will have to say that comes with an asterisk. Empathy is the bottom of it, I think gets deeper and deeper, goes lower and lower as you go through your life. And I was 46 and it happened, sort of the bottom of my empathy just sort of fell through after my dad died, and that happened really suddenly. And looking back and seeing how I portrayed him on the page, I still wonder, did I really do a good job? Because I had written all of that stuff with the understanding that he would never die. I think the people that helped me were the writers, people here on the stage, people who have written for many, many years about the ethics of writing about other people. But I think also for myself, the most important thing is to write again. I didn't ever say I would never write again because this horrible thing happened and I had a mixture of grief and regret and wondering about how perfectly I was able to do something like portray my father on the page. I wrote again, and right now I think I'm writing an essay really about this particular experience, sort of an eye-level narrative of what it was like to have my own ambitions for my book, Big Success, and have my dad, who chased big money, die, and that is another way for me to find out how bottomless my empathy is, to grow my empathy through writing. And also, Sari, thank you so much for giving me this little out about, I didn't kill my dad. You're right. He never read it. I thought before he died, he was always like, I'll read it in 7 to 8 years. And I was like, this is such a random amount of time. Like, where is this 7 to 8 years coming? He's like, I'll be ready in 7 to 8 years. Okay, Dad.
I would like to recommend that to my parents. Maybe in 7 or 8 years. See how you feel about it.
Maybe they'll die in between.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah, Elissa.
So really, when this happened to me, I actually stopped writing for a while, and it was so shocking, and so, abandonment as we know it is primal. I mean, it is the primal human fear that goes back, millennia. And it invades every part of our lives. You drop a 4-year-old off at nursery school for the first time, and there's that abandonment, terror, and it is terror, But I am, I'm blessed to have, my wife is a wonderful reader, a deeply kind and empathic person and fair person who knew and knows all parties, and would waste no time in saying to me, I think you did something not great, if that's what you felt like, if that's what you felt like. But so I think that certainly she was part of it. But in that family, there's another cousin. There's a cousin who I've always been very, very close to, and from the time I was very little. And she's a brilliant painter and an incredibly kind person. And I think the fact of the book was hard for her because she had grown up in this other side of the family that didn't know the story. Her mother, my aunt, had hidden this story about our grandmother from her and from her sister. And I want to say about 8 months after the book came out, she let me know in no uncertain terms that no matter what happened, that she still loved me, and that really changed. That was like the first sort of crack of light, that I had, because there was so much self-loathing. It was unbelievable. So there was that. But there was also the work of many other writers whose work I kept and keep on my bedside. My first introduction to your work was the Rumpus interview with Cheryl Strayed in 2012, and I actually carry that in my folio even now.
Wow.
And that interview compelled me to reach out to Cheryl right after this thing happened to me, and we had a conversation about that because something not dissimilar had happened to her after Wild came out. So there was that, and then I did this crazy thing where I read my way through the Art of Memoir interviews in the Paris Review, and I read all the way back, trying to glean how people dealt with this. And and then I became friends with Anne Lamott. She was like, she didn't say get over it, but she historically, famously said, if people wanted you to write more kindly about them, they should have behaved better.
Yeah.
And that's like, maybe not. But it was a combination of all of those things. It was my wife, it was my cousin letting me know, I still love you. You're 40 years old, 50 years old. I said, the work of other people. I'm also a musician, so continuing to play music, that was very healing. And then I was able to start thinking about how this was going to impact my next book. and the book after that, and it has. And, you know, I think that it's really important to shed light on things of shame. And this was a thing of shame for me, of great shame. So light and air and art help tremendously, and love. So,
You know, Elissa, it's so amazing that given what you went through with part of your family disowning you in that way, that you have become a serial memoirist.
I know, it's crazy.
And then in each memoir, you reveal, you know, difficult things to the sources of shame.
Yes.
Like that you haven't let it completely shut you down, even though it shut you down for years. Like you rebounded, and that's really inspiring. And I'm glad you brought up Anne Lamott and my Rumpus column. So my Rumpus column is all about how do you reveal the parts of yourself that would upset your family, and also how do you reveal other people without like ruining their lives or making them hate you. And you know, the Anne Lamott quote about if people wanted you to write warmly about you, they should have treated you better. It really just scratches the surface. And since then, other people have written about this, and I have arrived as an editor of other people's personal essays and memoirs, a ghostwriter of memoir. I really had a lot of time to wrestle with what's the right way to do this. There is no one right way, and everyone I've interviewed for that Rumpus column has a different approach. But it is something that I've been wrestling with for a long time, and I've come around to feeling like there are ways to approach memoir where you can blur people, you can you know, kind of in later drafts extract details that really don't move your story forward and maybe save face for someone a little bit. So I wanted to hear from each of you. It's impossible just to tell stories from our lives without also implicating other people, many of whom would prefer not to appear in your story. How did you handle writing about people in your life? Did you change names? Did you alert people? Did you let them read your book or passages ahead of time? Did you give anyone veto power? So I'm going to have each of you touch on that. We might as well just keep going in the same order. Let's start with Jonathan.
Nobody had veto power. That's not fair, it's my book. I did contact some old high school friends and family friends who I hadn't been in touch with for years, mostly to sort of verify that my memory of certain anecdotes was viable. You know, I wasn't really asking for their version of it, but I needed to know that I wasn't totally off or making something up. I changed a few names because there were some stories I had to tell in the book that could have really embarrassed someone, or it might have been someone I'd lost touch with and couldn't find. Several, by the way, because I'm 77, several of the people I looked for had just died within the last few months, which was kind of upsetting and made me realize a whole other thing about my life, which is how I've abandoned scenes and people. These were like my closest friends in high school who I never saw again after we graduated. Why? Something to do with it.
Yeah.
But I want to say something else about telling stories that might make people angry. I'd already had the experience of writing about the Weather Underground, about which there's quite a lot of hagiography and kind of romanticism. And I was writing a story that was very much from the inside and very much revelatory of some really like unsavory aspects of the organization and our history that the people who are still champions of it, those who were there, like to cover up and not talk about. So I knew at the time, some of these people are really going to be mad at me, and they're really going to hate me. And I wasn't in touch with them anymore. I didn't need them anymore.
Yeah.
So I just got over it and told the truth. And sure enough, some of them really hate me.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And a lot of other people, including people who were part of it, were very grateful that I had sort of told some of these secrets. And you know, the thing I said in the beginning, you know, that was a lot of story about my continued suppression of being gay and my groping with being gay. And as this book is as well. So it's very personal, but both of them are very political in the sense of efforts to depict a moment in history that from an experiential point of view. So I feel that kind of political intention is a form of permission, because especially the story about the radical movement in the 60s. I mean, this is verifiable history. This is objective. You know, I wasn't making any of it up, and I felt the same way about this book, that I was describing how kind of smart-ass affluent kids like me acted out when they were in high school, and that's a piece of history too.
Right. So it feels kind of, it's almost like a justification, like for journalism, or you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not journalism
truth-telling.
writing, but it's
important truth-telling.
Yeah, and it's filling in sort of publicly available knowledge. So there's no real kind of risk there.
Right. Thank you. Hyeseung.
I want to talk about two parts of this book, my book. You remember that part when you just go to the copyright page where nobody reads any of that small type? There's a little disclaimer written by my wonderful attorney over at Simon & Schuster about how I changed names and identifying details. And in some cases, it was actually only two cases where I combined characters and merged them into one. And the reason I did that was I am and was very avid novel reader, and it was very important to me, and this is something that I've talked to numerous other memoirists about, to have a very novelistic structure to my book, but also it was more important to me to align on what I call emotional truth rather than work on some objective fact or narrative truth. That's probably another Sari Botton panel for another time, emotional truth. But I also want to talk about this other part of my book, which is at the end of the book. Sometimes you don't get there, but if you're a writer, you always read the acknowledgments because they're just so juicy. So you want to see who has uplifted the book and who's helped the writer. And before I get to the slew of wonderful people who helped me, I wrote 2 paragraphs about so I'm a painter by trade. I'm an oil painter, figurative painter, and I talk about this time when I was back in school in New York, and every Wednesday afternoon we would stand around in sort of like a half circle around a portrait model, and we'd all paint the same portrait of the same person in the same pose at the same time with probably very similar supplies. And then at break, you'd walk that semicircle and you'd realize, we all tried to do and capture the same person at the same time, same pose, and our work looked entirely different. Okay, so to me that was sort of like, it was an answer to the disclaimer, sort of filling out what that disclaimer is. And I really thought about 3 circles. The year before my manuscript was out, I think we were in the second pass pages of copy editing. And I thought, well, it's time for the reckoning. I thought about these 3 circles. I thought about the people whom I'm in touch with and have a good relationship with, whom I wrote about, and I want to still have a good relationship with at the end of this whole nonsense. And then I thought about the people I haven't been in touch with, and I did write about them, and I don't care if I'm going to be in touch with them later. So, and then I thought about the 3rd circle of people are the people that I had a good relationship with, and that I didn't know if I cared either way, if they could accept or not. And the first circle of people received pages from my manuscript with the warning, hey, this is gonna go out in a year. Your name has been changed, identifying details have been changed. If there's anything factual or anything that you want to process with me, we can do that, but I can't promise that anything is gonna change. And absolutely none of those people cared. They were like, this is awesome. One of my roommates from college, she was like, I actually hate the name you chose for me, the pseudonym you chose for me. Can you change it to another name? And I was like, sure, I don't care. The second circle of friends, like I think Jonathan, you were talking about the people that you sort of fell out of touch with. Like I kind of came from it a different way. Like I wasn't gonna go chase people I wasn't in touch with, right? So that, because I wasn't in touch with them, and so I wasn't gonna have a relationship with them after the book, so that was no big deal. The third circle was, I think, the most problematic, because it was, the third circle was just one person. It was my brother, with whom I was estranged for a long time. And so, and he knew, because I had been writing this book for so long, I remember at some point at the depths of our relationship, when we were so nasty to each other and were really not understanding each other, he turned around and looked at me and he said, "You do not have my consent to write about me." And I remember, I know, right. And I remember like thinking, and he did get written about, and I did send him the pages that he showed up with, and he had a hard time with them. We talked about it at the time, but that didn't change. That was adjacent to our relationship, which has been problematic and difficult these many, many years.
So it was going to be difficult either way.
Yeah. So no veto again, but it was like, everybody was, and I think this is the beauty of your book, Elissa, is that like you talk a lot about how each memoirist has to kind of come up with their own personal route through this thorny path, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something that really helps me a lot.
Before I have you speak, I just want to tell one funny thing about Martha that relates to what you were saying about painting, that you're all doing different versions of the same person in the same room. I think it was the first edition of the Woodstock Book Festival, at the Memoir panel, Martha told this story, and it's actually in my book in the intro, or in the foreword, I can't remember which, but she talked about when she finished the manuscript for her memoir, Hats and Eyeglasses, which is excellent, and you should all read it. She sent it to her sister and basically said, let me know if I got anything wrong. Or if there's anything you want me to change. So her sister reads it and comes back to her and says, well, none of it's true, but I don't have a problem with you publishing it. And I've come up against that so much in my life, where I remember a situation one way and my sister remembers it another and my mother remembers it another. And so I also have a disclaimer at the front of my book that this is my version of the truth, and it's not the sovereign version. And that's what memoir is. But anyway, now let's have Elissa talk about this.
So to your point, and to your point, I write about this also in the book, that, if you put 5 adult siblings around a dinner table and say, do you remember what happened in 1975 when Dad got drunk on the Jim Beam? And each one of the siblings will tell you a different story, including one will say, Dad didn't drink. And they will like cling to their versions like with bloody fingertips. And the thing about that story is that every person is entitled to their truth, okay? Every person is entitled to their truth. There can only be one fact, right? But every person is entitled to their truth because we all see the world through different lenses, different experiences. And if we all know siblings, as I said, I'm an only child, but we all know siblings who you look at them and you're like, did you two grow up in the same house? I mean, right? Yeah. So I do not, as a rule, show everyone who appears in my memoirs manuscripts or sections. There was one instance actually in permission, where I was relating a story about Katherine Harrison that I had heard, and I reached out to some friends and I said, does anybody know how to get in touch with her? Somebody shot me her email, and I sent her a note and I said, I just need to know if this is right. And she said, yeah, it's right. Thank you for checking, and it's fine. Susan, my wife, is my first reader, and she is an extremely fair reader. And, so she is my first reader. I have friends in high school who I have showed very carefully, very selectively, and they have all come back and said, I might remember something a little bit differently, but yeah, this is probably, how you remember things. I just want to relate quickly. There's a famous story about the wonderful memoirist and poet Honor Moore. I don't know if you all know Honor Moore, but some years ago,
Bishop's daughter.
Yeah, some years ago, she wrote a book called The Bishop's Daughter. She was the daughter of the Archbishop of the city of New York, Paul Moore, very famous in New York City, very involved in in anti-war work and civil rights work, and he had written his own memoir a few years before he died, in which he revealed his bisexuality. And suddenly, everybody knew, the church knew, everybody knew. And then he left all of his papers to his daughter in care of the church, right? So he dies, the church turns his papers, his letters over to Honor, and he recognized the fact that she was probably gonna write about him. So she writes this book, and in which she also reveals his bisexuality, as well as her own and her grandmother's, and so everything is all connected. And she sends galleys I want to say she was one of 8 or 9. She sent, I'm sorry? 9. Thank you. She sends galleys to everyone, all of her siblings, and says, if something is wrong, please correct it. If something's upsetting, please let me know, etc., etc. And only one comes back with a minor change, right? The New Yorker publishes an excerpt from the book, and the following week, she is pilloried in letters to the editor by 2 of her siblings who had approved of the galley. So you never know. You just do not ever know. So I try to be as fair as I can. I usually almost always change names. I have created composite characters. I let people know that on the copyright page. Everything I do goes through a legal read, and I also have to, self-check, am I being fair? Always. And am I doing it out of revenge or attribution or that's a whole other.
That was going to be our next question, but we're coming up on time for you guys to ask questions, and you'll probably get to it too. I've made 5 questions for this, and I assured them that we'd probably have a hard time getting to all of them, and it's true. I just want to quickly say that my way of dealing with this is that I blur people in situations which some people say, well, now it's fiction or autofiction, and no, it's not. It's still my essential truth. I am a stand-in. I am a person who experienced a phenomenon that other people experienced, and so, but I blur people so well that my best friend didn't recognize one of my exes. My best friend said to me, when did you date a painter? I said, I have never dated a painter. She's like, well, who the hell is that? And I told her, she's like, wow. So anyway, now it's time for us to take some questions from the audience. And is there going to be a mic for people? You're going to do it, Martha? Okay.
Sorry.
Martha's going to come around with a mic.
No, I don't have a mic.
Oh, without a mic.
I will tell you, oh, that's annoying, because that mic is bouncing off the thing all day.
About
that. Yes.
Oh,
Jesus.
okay. So let's,
You have to tell me that stuff.
okay, so who's going to,
Ask me the question, I'll repeat it to Sari, and she'll repeat it.
okay, so Martha's going to be the intermediary here.
Yes, back there.
At what point do you have to call it autofiction? Like, where do you draw the line?
At what point do you have to call it auto?
I mean, there's no rule. There's nobody out there saying this is hereby now autofiction. But what do you guys think?
What is autofiction?
Well, there's a car on the cover of my book, and because I was 16 and got my driver's license on my first car, somebody made a joke last night at an event that it was autofiction. It's about cars. I think that's a very murky, sort of interesting and murky and enormous, subject for another whole conference.
Yeah, autofiction is like autobiographical fiction that's so close that it reads like memoir, but the writer is supposedly looking at it from another angle so that it's not really perfectly autobiographical. But I've also gotten into arguments with people about this. I went to a talk that Sheila Heti and Chris Kraus did, and at the end I raised my hand and I said, why do you call this fiction? Because you're using transcripts of your texts with someone and your phone calls, and it gets pretty close to the truth. And they both were like, oh, I would never write memoir. Memoir is repugnant. And I'm like, all right, you lost me. So I don't fully understand what autofiction is.
I agree with that. I think that autofiction, the way that I see it being executed a lot of times is because people are scared to wear the cloak of memoirist.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Absolutely.
It really is. And a great answer, I think, is in Melissa Febos's body work. I'm sorry, I'm looking out. I'm trying to make eye contact with the person who asked the question. She talks about how she was similarly very, very embarrassed to say that she was writing a memoir. But then she says, like, everywhere in the world there is trauma. Give me your trauma stories, give me your memoirs, give me your personal narratives, make the room bigger.
Yeah.
And we can withstand the room expanding.
Yeah. I have seen some instances where autofiction takes the autobiographical story and then adds like magical realism, or fantasy stuff, and that, okay, you can have that. Then I'll call it autofiction. But if you're like using transcriptions of phone conversations you had with your friend verbatim, you're writing a memoir. Next question.
Thank you all, and so many questions are coming out of all of your answers, so thank you, very important. Unfortunately, my father read my first manuscript, and sadly he died a few months ago. But when he read it, his response was, I felt myself so defensive throughout the book, but I had to remember this was your experience of what happened. And it was like, oh, and now he's dead and he can't read my next manuscript. But my one sister had the reaction, I learned things about you, it was the worst day of my life. So my question is, if I change the name, so you can change somebody's name, but are you still describing them as your sister or your father, or how do you do
That's
that?
a tough one.
Everybody heard the question?
Yeah, how do you write about, there are certain people you can't blur because of the position in your life. And Taffy Ackner addresses this in a really funny way in a piece she did for the Times Magazine about getting high with her mother. And the first paragraph is basically like, my mother, not her real name. It's so hard, but I actually found a way to deal with some of the stuff about my family, my parents. Particularly, I have a chapter about having an eating disorder and being influenced. Initially, on the first version, it's really, I'll reveal to this room and whoever watches the video that one of my parents has, an eating disorder, compulsive overeater. And in the original version, there was a lot about that. And I couldn't do it. And then I changed it to the adults around me. And as I worked on that version, I realized it wasn't a lie, that it wasn't just my parents. starving themselves, then, hating their bodies, commenting on my body. My babysitters, my school teachers, my camp counselors, everyone was obsessed with body and weight and talked about the things they were doing to themselves and commented on my body and everyone else's body. And so I found a way to talk about something that was happening in the culture at large with the adults and the children. And it made it so that my parents, could stand to read it. And is there another version down the line? Maybe. Anybody else want to speak to that? How you write about people in certain positions in your life who you can't blur. I mean, you wrote a memoir about your relationship with your mother.
Yeah, but she has NPD, so she loved it.
Oh, okay.
So,
NPD being narcissistic personality disorder.
So if you wanna, be totally fine, you need a parent who has NPD, but or dead. But I had to write.
You've told us so much times.
I had to write about her, and the story changed midway through. She knew I was writing it. She walked around New York City talking about it to all the independent bookstores as the story of me. So there was that. So she didn't, but that's like a best case scenario,
right?
So.
You're reminding me. I interviewed Vivian Gornick was the first person I interviewed for my Rumpus column.
Oh my God.
And she told me the story of her first memoir, Fierce Attachments, is one of my favorite memoirs, and it's about her relationship with her difficult mother. And she tells me in the interview that when the book first came out, her mother said to her, "This hurts, this is painful." And she said, "I'm sorry." And then she said a year later, her mother was signing copies in bookstores. She'd come around. Did you want to say something?
No, I didn't. But I was marveling at what you said about how you morphed from mother to many adults, because I think we forget that in limitations, in craft limitations, sometimes we can find more meaning than we even expected, right?
Yeah, it feels more meaningful. I'm really commenting on a phenomenon, on a culture. Yeah. Did you want to say something, Jonathan?
No.
Okay, good. Who's next?
One than the other.
I have a soft voice, so I'm going to try and talk loud.
I'll repeat it.
Okay, so I'm just, I write fiction. So I've seen quite a few memoirs this time. And one of the things that I keep hearing in terms of permission is that you all have partners, husbands that are extremely supportive. Okay, so I feel like that's the component. That seems so striking to me, because so I write fiction, and my husband will never read anything I write, and I have lots of fiction friends that are in that same place. So I want to just ask about do you feel like that? Because when I'm listening to it, that's what I'm taking from it. That it's such an important thing that you.
I guess she's saying, what's it like to have a supportive partner who supports your work?
Or where do you find them?
And where do you find them? I found mine on Nerve Personals in 2003.
I found mine on AOL in 1999.
We were set up by mutual friends.
There you go. Thanks for that question. I feel entirely humbled and reminded again to be grateful. So thank you for that question. I do have the most amazing partner, and it's not just about the fallout or whatever was going to happen because of this particular issue of consent and permission, but the whole publishing journey is really, really tough. It's very fraught, it's very ego-driven, there's a lot of compare, despair, and my husband, whom I met on Hinge, has been amazing, and that it's just, thank you for your question, and thank you for that reminder.
My husband is also a musician and a poet, and it was in his dating profile, and I knew, that I was looking at another creative person who's probably wrestling with the same things. It's funny, I want to do a live Oldster event with speed dating for people over 55 at the end. And now I'm thinking,
asking for a new husband.
no. But what I am thinking is I should do a Memoir Land event, and at the end have speed dating for people who are looking for supportive, like writers who are looking for supportive partners.
Can I just add one quick thing? There's the belief that with an incredibly supportive partner comes absolute approval. And that is not the case. So if I write something really not okay,
Yes.
my wife is the first person to tell me and to be really clear about it, and there are, she appears in every one of my books, but beyond herself, if there's something that she feels that I'm being unfair about or unclear about, she will tell me and I will change it. I don't think that there's been any time that you've suggested something where I haven't made the change, so because you've been right. Yeah, sure.
So just to amplify that question, do you feel like you could write memoir without that person there, critiquing it, saying yes to it, saying yes to you? Do you see that as a huge part of?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to imagine an alternate situation. I did have a different husband first. He probably wouldn't have loved what I do. I don't know.
About that first husband, Sari has one of these on Woodstock Bookfest videos. It's called Make It Snappy, I think it was the whole evening. She told an incredible story about her first husband in 3-word sentences.
And my Jewish divorce.
Yeah. Jody?
Thanks.
Can you speak to this? My life was explained to me when my mother let a secret slip. My father had kept the secret for 35 years. She's the only one who knew it. She kept it for the next 50 years, including after his death. She accidentally let it slip, and then everything in my life made sense. And I want to write to that, but there's a big part of me that feels these are two people who kept this secret for so long, and it's a very shameful secret for him. And it made her feel terrible about her. So there's a lot of shame involved on their level. And I kind of feel like, do I have that permission? But it directly affects me and how I understand myself.
I'm going to let Elissa take this because this is such an Elissa question.
That's why
So does this story make you who you are?
Yes.
And does this have you transcended this story? Had they, before they passed, transcended this story? Has it changed the color of the world for you? Will it impact the lives of readers who are also carrying ancient shames on, like in a tote bag, basically, because that's what my grandmother's leaving was like. If that is the case, I do feel strongly that you have the right to write about it. It's really hard and heartrending while you're writing it, and the clarity that comes out of writing something like that for yourself is inestimable.
And also when there's shame, I think Elissa touched on this before, when there's shame, run toward it, not away from it, because when you write about something shameful, you are reaching all the other people who feel that shame.
It's the feeling of betrayal that I'm struggling with. It's not shameful to me, but it's like, oh, do I have the right to reveal their secret that they were so ashamed of?
Have you read Elissa's book yet?
No, I just bought it.
We'll talk after.
Yeah.
All the way in the back. Yeah.
Thank you for the panel. Really amazing. I usually write fiction, but I'm considering writing memoir. I've been told in the past by several people that my writing tends to sound egocentric. Like there's a lot of I's involved, and there's a lot of I think, I feel, and in memoir, I'm sure that's a huge part of it. But is there like a tone or a balance that you have between like writing about a situation from like bird's eye view versus what like saying I in every single sentence and like having like that like really centeredness? Does that make sense?
Who's giving you this feedback? That's so important, because if you get a bunch of memoirists together who are reading and giving you feedback, they're probably not going to say, "Oh, too much I."
Well, I teach memoir, and I tell my students, don't show this to your family. Don't, like, that they should not be your first readers unless you can really trust them.
Yeah.
Unless they have a stake in the game. And so I think that's an important question. Who's reading your stuff?
Figuring out who you're going to take feedback from takes time and work and a lot of trial and error, but
Trust.
Trust. It is so important to find the people who can understand you and your voice and what your goal is and help you get there. I think that's the most important answer to your question is, and then finding that balance, that's something you do in revision.
I have a brief other question, very brief. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. How do you deal with looking back on parts of your life where you were the one in transition and lost that didn't happen?
You were the one.
Where you're the villain?
Yeah.
How do you deal with parts of your life where you're the villain or where you've done something wrong? And you can really speak to that, I think.
I was a really bad boy in a lot of ways. Worse, actually, in the radical movement than in my high school times, I think. How do you just take a deep breath and do it, and it actually, in my experience, doing it makes it easier to keep doing it. I had no angst in writing this book about myself as an adolescent, addressing my sexuality and my sexual experiences, because I've written about it in the earlier book, in the earlier memoir. Part of what that is the story of is that when I was underground, I was doing sex work, gay sex work, to support myself. That took a deep breath to write, but the world did not fall apart when I wrote it, and a lot of people found it kind of interesting. So I think, there's always going to be fear of something, and the only way to get the book written is to just take a deep breath and fight the fear, embrace the fear.
Yeah. Also, it's so important to write the early drafts with the idea that no one's going to see them. I talk about getting it out of your body, out of your head, so you can look at it, so you're not feeling so charged by the story. And then as you're working on it, you're going to discover there are parts where you are complicit or where you are the villain, and you have to reckon with that. I have a piece in here about a Mean Girls situation that happened to me in junior high, and the crystallized version in my head was that this keeps repeating in my life because it happened to me once. And then once I got it out of my body and I could look at it, I was reminded of times where I played the role of the mean girl, and I had to own that, and it was hard. It was really hard. And so, yeah, you have to get to a place where you can do that. We should probably take one more and then sign books. Oh, we do have more time? Okay.
Hi. I want to say thank you for this. This is like speaking directly to what I'm going through right now. I have written a memoir. It's almost finished. Almost nobody has heard, it from me. I have a family member who has forbidden me to write this because of this person's behavior. And, I almost didn't raise my hand because somebody said the word video, like, I'll reveal to this room and this video. I was like, video, zip, but that's been my whole life, zip. That's what the person, that was what they did my whole life, was to muzzle me. And now I've written this, and I've written it not out of revenge. I've written it because I believe it will help so many people. And my question, it's like these issues are so huge to grapple with, but I have two questions, and one is Is it possible after this is done for me to talk to you guys? Or are you all gonna scurry off? You know?
We'll be signing our
We'll be
books.
signing books,
Okay.
but we're also going to be getting ready for another panel. So,
Okay.
yeah.
My other question is, I don't know much at all about the next steps, like how do I find an editor to work with me? Like, you know, the whole road to publishing and
Are
any
you guys gonna take this? The question is, what does she do with a written memoir? How does she get it published?
Yeah.
I mean, you want to, you need an agent. Although now there's a lot of hybrid publishing where people are not agented and it's part, you pay a certain amount, but also you have to be selected. But there's so much to this.
We should do a publishing.
Yeah, next time. And
A separate thing.
yeah, or maybe on Memoirland. Maybe we'll do a thing, a panel on publishing on Memoirland. And there's a lot to this, and there's a lot been written about it. Buy Courtney Mom's before and after the book deal, and subscribe to her Substack.
Courtney Mom?
Courtney Mom, M-A-U-M, before and after the book deal.
Thank you.
That will help you.
Okay, let's take, in the back row.
What makes you all think that your lives are so interesting?
That's such a good question. Such a good question, and it's something I wrestled with every night in the middle of the night before I published my book. Who cares about me? But we're all stand-ins. The best memoir is memoir that illuminates parts of people, regular mundane parts of people's lives that they also experienced, but it's written by a writer, so it's really relatable and beautiful. I think it's such important work. Who wants to speak to this? Let's have Hyeseung.
I was just gonna say, when I was talking about my book, I talked about it in terms of another book, The Girl Interrupted, which is now in its 32nd year. And I said it's the Asian girl interrupted, and I'm the only, person of color on this stage. And there was a long period in which I was toiling by myself, and there was sort of a fledgling memoir tree, and off of this memoir tree, there's now this flourishing AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander memoir branch, of which I am part. And I think that for me, a lot of times it felt I needed to write this, obviously for me, but I know inside that I'm also an artist, which means that I want to make art. I want the art to go out in the world, have its own existence, be consumed by other people. And if that means that they lift it up or drag it down, that's with the art. That's not really with me. And so for me, in the last 8 months, having this book out, I write a lot about shame in this book. And in terms of intergenerational trauma and the fact that Asian Americans are not supposed to have mental illness, we're not supposed to have any kind of costs to the intergenerational trauma that a lot of our ancestors dealt with. That was something that I was grappling with, and I get these messages all the time landing in my inbox from people who have read my book, people who are like me, that see in my story some value in their life. So it's the specific goes to the universal, and then from the universal again, people are tethered and seeing themselves. So that's a beautiful thing, and it's been wonderful. Yeah.
We're gonna take one more question. Sure.
I kind of answered that. My comment or question is, you've all mastered memoir. Memoir is a hard genre. How do you take your life and your work, and are you consciously bringing it up to the highest art form in terms of prose, storytelling?
Mm-hmm.
You set out with that? Because there's a difference between reporting out, this is my life, what happened, and making it universal with the specifics. But do you find yourself consciously making it high art because you've all mastered it and you have beautiful books?
So it's a question about, the difference between like just a rattled off anecdote and making art of your story. I first think the first job of the memoirist is to make meaning of the story so that it's not just a journal entry or a rattled off anecdote that you tell again and again. But there is a craft and an art to writing, and to writing it in such a way that it is most likely going to speak to other people and let them have an elevated experience of reading about your life. Do any of you want to take that too?
You know, I was just going to say, with the last question, we are the art-making species. That is what we do, you know. And to Sari's point, and to your point, there's a difference between reporting and crafting. And you know, our goal, all of us and any memoirist, I think, is to continue to work at our craft, to elevate it to a place where it is not, you know, journal entries. And I'm a longtime journal keeper, so, and my journals, I hope nobody finds them, but, you know. But that's really, you know, they're two very, very different things.
Beginners struggle with that from classes I've been in myself. So it's just, you keep writing, I guess, and digging.
Yeah, as you draft, as you do new revisions, that's where the, you know, the art making comes in, the meaning making and the art making.
Thank you.
I want to add something to that. I think I said before that a memoir has to function as a good story, like any other good story. Narrative arc, conflict resolution,
Good
characters, scenes. And I've also written several novels, and to me, actually, the process is not that different. And I realized after writing this memoir that I've actually created a character in the memoir named Jonathan Lerner, who everything about him is true of me, but everything about me is not true of him. And by the way, now that the book is out and I'm working on promoting it, I'm really creating another character called Jonathan Lerner, who's able to sit up on a stage and talk. But so, you know, it's study novel writing. Read how novelists write novels, and you will learn also useful craft for memoir writing.
That's good advice.
Well, thank you, Sari.
Yes. Thank you, Martha. And thank you, Michelle Rigo, who sponsored this panel. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, my wonderful panelists. Thank you, Elissa, for writing this book. I've attached myself like a barcode with her. We do 2 events with her, Rough Draft on the 14th and this Tuesday in Manhattan. Woo!
So you're gonna come down.
We're gonna come down here and we're gonna sign books.